It is now my pleasure to turn today's program over to Dr. Peter Hurst, Associate Dean of MIT Sloan Executive Education. Dr. Hurst, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the next session in the Innovation at Work webinar series brought to you from MIT Sloan Executive Education here in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I'm here today with Don Kieffer, Senior Lecturer in Operations Management at MIT Sloan School of Management, and he's going to be talking with us today about his work on the subject of how to unlock your organization's full potential with dynamic work design. Innovation Work webinar series are a method that we try to bring to the world the latest insights and ideas from our MIT Sloan Executive Education faculty. And after the presentation is over, we'll have a question and answer session. We'll also be making available, as many of you asked about it, the slides and a recording of the session at the end. Before we move on to fully introducing Don, we've got a couple of questions that we thought we would ask you, as we know people are signing in from all over the world, and so if perhaps we could push the first polling question, which is, what part of the world are you from? So that question should be coming up now, and if you would just please go ahead and share in the next few seconds whereabouts in the world you are, and we'll just take a look at that data momentarily. So the last few seconds, okay, if we could look at the results of that, please. Well, that's an interesting and unlikely result. Apparently, most people seem to be in the USA. If there's anybody who is from another part of the world, maybe in the Q&A segment, feel free to let us know where you're from when you're asking questions. Something seems to have gone a little awry with the polling on that question. But let's just continue to profile who you are. Our next question, just to help set us up for this discussion, if we could push the next question, is what kind of work do you do primarily? And the options are that you're essentially a knowledge worker, probably work in an office, but some other setting perhaps that you're a knowledge worker, or more that you work with physical stuff. You're in a factory or manufacturing, you're creating physical products. Please go ahead and let us know which of those most describes the work that you typically do. Okay, and if we just take a look at the results of those. Again, we seem to be having an interesting challenge with our polling system here. 100% of you are knowledge workers. Perhaps that's not surprising.
Not surprising.
Even in a manufacturing setting, perhaps you consider yourself a knowledge worker. Again, in the Q&A session, if you'd like to clarify particularly the work perspective that you're bringing, if it's not that, then please feel free to do that. One final question, and I have a suspicion what the answer might be, but what's your role within the organization? If you could push the next question, please. Okay, and hopefully everyone is quick to click, and we can close the poll and see the results of that. Okay, well that makes more sense. We're saying that a lot of people are in middle management. Again, I suspect there may be some people who didn't click quickly enough that were in other categories. Feel free to let us know if you want to ask a question from a different perspective when we get to the Q&A session. But let's move ahead. Thank you for participating in that. It was helpful to see. And I'd like now to introduce the gentleman sitting here with me, Don Kieffer. As I mentioned, Don's a senior lecturer in operations management at the MIT Sloan School. He teaches in a number of executive education programs here at the Sloan School and also in our degree programs. He has a very impressive background in the world of practice of engineering management, which I think we're going to learn a little bit about during the course of his presentation, but has become a very significant and important contributor in this field of how we organize and design our work to improve efficiency and productivity and quality in our organizations in all kinds of work. And so with that, I'd like to hand over the floor to Don, and I'll come back in towards the end to ask you some questions that we've been asked through the system.
Good. Thank you, Peter. And hello, everyone. As Peter said, I'm Don Kieffer, Senior Lecturer at MIT. And the topic today is dynamic work design. You probably haven't heard about dynamic work design because my colleague Nelson Repenning, who's also an associate dean here, and I've been working on this for 20 years, and we've just created it in the last few years. So let's start with something you may be familiar with, which is static design. Most people, when they think about designing work, think about the org chart or a piece of process mapping. These are necessary tools in work and trying to figure out and organize how hundreds or thousands of people work together. But the problem with these two pieces is they don't tell you what to do when work starts moving and when problems start happening. And that's the subject of dynamic work design. So dynamic work design, if I were to give you a quick definition, it's a set of principles and structures or methods that guide human behavior through an organization as work moves through an organization, including finding and fixing problems and making improvements in real time. Not a department, not episodic, not a project, but as we're doing the work, it's part of the work and it's designed into the work. It is particularly helpful, and this has been our focus for at least 15 years, specifically on office work or knowledge work. So strategy implementation, creative work, innovation, administrative work, technical work, those types of work where the product is knowledge or information. And the problem with this is this work is hard to see, so it's hard to organize. And so we use visual management techniques often to give the invisible work a physical face, usually with post-it notes on the wall, so that we can begin to deal with it and organize it and make it improve much faster. Many people have said all these techniques like Toyota Production System, Lean, Six Sigma are only good for physical work, and in the factory they're not for me because I'm a creative worker, I'm an executive, I'm a CEO. Our experience is that these techniques are way more powerful in the office areas than they ever have been in the factory because you can only compress physical work so far. But knowledge work can be almost infinitely compressed. And that's where we focused on for a long time, as I said. So actually, office work is different. And it's more highly variable, it's more collaborative, it's invisible, it's much more complex, and it has a higher component of creativity than most physical work. And most people have a problem if they know improvement techniques that they've learned in the factory. Trying to move into the office is riddled with problems. If you try to take a tool from the factory and move it to engineering or strategy, it sometimes doesn't work. For example, some people try to take the concept of standard work, which is very useful in physical work, and try to move it to engineering, and they try to get the engineers to break things into little repeatable processes, and that's not the way they work. So the problem is they're trying to transfer a tool and not the understanding of what standard work does in physical work. The idea of standard work shows up in engineering as reusable knowledge. So we use limit curves and books and studies and all kinds of ways we can collect knowledge so that we can quickly solve a problem with knowledge that we've already solved. Standard work has the same kind of feature in physical work, is that we've solved a lot of problems, and in that standard work is a lot of knowledge about repetitive work. But when we move to creative work, we have to do it a different way. So if you miss the tool, if you have a tools approach, it's going to feel awkward to move these techniques into the office area, and this is what we've seen and tried to solve for 15 years. So here's a few tips from our experience just to get started. One is try to write the problem down. Most of your experience in knowledge work lies in a part of your brain that's not capable of language. we build up experience through habit, through pattern, through studying, and these parts of our brain work very quickly, but they're really not the logical part of our brain. So this simple act of just trying to write down the problem that you're trying to solve is going to keep you from jumping to solutions. Even though that part of your brain is absolutely sure that's what you should do, sometimes it's giving you the wrong message. So try to write the problem down. Another hint is we find a lot of people who say the problem in the office area is we don't have a process. You've just fallen into a little trap by defining a solution that you need to design a process. And then what happens is you go put people in an office area or in a room and you design a process, then roll it out to everyone. And this has tons and tons of problems. What we suggest is first is realize that there is a process for doing the work. It's just not written down. If there wasn't a process already, you wouldn't be able to do the work. So what you need to do is take a hike. Go see the work as it's happening. Go find out what's really happening and give it a physical manifestation. Draw it out. You'll see all kinds of super simple problems that you can solve to get a 20-30% improvement right away. So if you can't go with tools into the office area, our experience is you have to go with the thinking, with the idea. So we have 4 principles of dynamic work design that I want to talk to you about, just to give you the framework. And then I'm going to go a little more deeply into some of the tools and methods as a way to get started. The first principle is reconcile intent with activity. Every organization that I know of, regardless of what it does, is trying to solve a simple basic problem. We have targets, gaps, problems, strategies, something we're trying to do. And we're trying to get super clear about what that is. And then the second thing we're trying to do, which is really the only leverage we have to solve that problem, is we're trying to collect and organize that human activity to solve that problem as elegantly and as quickly as possible. So a lot of times people will just give you the target or they'll just do stuff. But what we do with the first principle is we have to align and check what are we trying to do and then give that activity a physical manifestation and say, does this set of activity solve these problems or not? And if we do it together, again, using Post-it notes or some physical manifestation on the wall, we get a lot of super deep, rich conversation and exchange of information, and we have a good chance of matching that activity set with the activity, with the target, and being successful. Second one is we want to connect the human chain through triggers and checks. So we're going to show you what triggers and checks means. But basically, there are 2 key features of dynamic work design that are different from any other kind of process improvement that we know of. One is, instead of focusing on the process steps, we focus on the inputs and outputs of the work as it's moving through the system from person to person to person. So the maps you're going to see us do highlight the individual people and then what their input and output is, because my output is going to be Peter's input. And we want to make sure those are matched up. And in this way, we can follow invisible work along the chain of people. The actual process steps are embedded deeper down. We're pretty confident people know how to do the work. Our experience is when things are going wrong, the biggest problem is people are not getting the information, all the input they need to do their job, or they don't know who the output goes to. And that is terribly problematic. So there's 2 areas we connect the human chain. One is along the line of the work, and the second is we connect the management system to the front line, so we deliver knowledge and problem solving up and down that chain quickly and in real time. And you're going to see that in a minute. The third one is, this is probably no stranger to you, is structured problem solving and creativity. There are many tools around in Six Sigma. It's known as DMAIC. Lean uses A3. TPS uses A3. We use A3. Basically, this is the Deming process of scientific experimentation. But to do it, we have to exercise a different part of our brain. And this goes back to the first bit of advice I gave you in the office area, which is try to write the problem down and go through it in a scientific method to try to avoid just jumping to solution. So this is many tools to do this. We don't care which one you use, but try to write it down. Get the problem, get the data, what's really happening, get a different design, and go get a plan and go do it, see what you learn. The fourth one is manage optimal challenge. This is sort of like a capacity statement about how much work is in the system, but we have a slightly different twist on it, which is if you have a system that's operating, what you want to look at is how many problems are we introducing into that system, and this helps us know how big a target to get. So a stretch target, is the target too big or too little? We can tell by the number of problems that get introduced. If there are no problems, we're not getting the performance out of the organization, and more importantly, we're not learning anything. What we want to do is put those targets, put some challenge into the organization, cause some problems, and in the process of fixing them and learning, we're going to advance. Just like if an athlete's training, if they're not training hard enough, they're not getting stronger. If they're training too hard, they're not getting stronger. So we have to find that sweet spot of managing the optimal challenge that we're putting into the organization to make sure we're, one, creating small problems or big problems, but two, that we have the time to actually solve them and learn from them and go on to the next one. So that's the conceptual framework of dynamic work design that we've developed over the years. Let's get into some of the practical pieces. What do you see? What do you see in this picture? Can you see the work? The work's invisible, totally unorganized. You can't tell if these people are ahead or behind. How about here? This is an example of work that's organized. Again, we've given it a physical face, being a Post-it note. This picture is an individual's workboard, and what they're doing, all those Post-it notes represent contracts that are being renegotiated in a large procurement organization. Right away, I can see the stage the negotiation is in with the supplier. I can see how many are active. I can see if there's problems. And what this person does is, when it's time for the staff meeting, picks up this board, and that board is the basis for the report to the manager. And it's so clear, everyone can understand what's happening, and they can ask lots of questions. So there are two types of work. The first one you're probably familiar with. It's work that is repetitive. I'm going to go through all these pieces on the screen, and I'm going to walk through them one at a time. Work that is repetitive means we do this a lot. In the factories and physical work, this is a no-brainer. We do this all the time. But when you walk to the office area, people go, hey, this is not a factory. We're smart. We're creative. Everything's different. Not so much so. Processing invoices is a repetitive activity. Doing the board book every quarter by the finance organization, or doing treasury, or rolling up and closing the books every month, these are all repetitive types of work to which we can discover the steps, split it up among special people or certain people, and we know that if we accomplish these steps, then we're going to get a result. And if we do the steps, if we don't get the result, only two things could happen. This is the basis of standard work. Either we didn't follow the steps properly, or we've just found some other information and we have to improve the steps. But we can break this down among individuals so the work is done serially, it's repetitive. Now quickly, here are the 7 steps, kind of like a checklist. If you have any type of repetitive work in the physical work or in intellectual work, 7 questions you can ask yourself to see what's missing in this and how can I make this go better. So number 1, all the way over to the right, is the customer, and the first question is, do we know what the value is that we're delivering to the customer? And everyone has to know that. 2 is, we want to identify the people that the work is passing through. Again, this is one of the different pieces about dynamic work design than any other improvement technique or philosophy that we know of. And we have to identify not the departments, but the specific people for whom the work is traveling through. If you can't do that, that's the first thing you have to fix. Then we put them in a room and make sure they all get their inputs and outputs aligned. That's number 3. Once they agree what the input and output is, those pairs, we create a test. If I'm supposed to deliver Peter a webinar on Tuesday at 12 o'clock and we don't, okay, that's a failed test. So then the next element is that failed test is detected by someone in the management chain and they respond right away. Number 6 is they investigate quickly, and in standard work we see, did Don not follow the steps of the work, or did we just learn something new and let's make the change and 7 is we're going to keep the right amount of work. The perfect ideal example of this is an assembly line, and most people now know the modifications that Toyota has made to make physical work good and the way it's affected factories all around the world. We have a factory, we have an assembly line. If something goes wrong, that's the test. We have a test. I'm going to pull the cord, stop the line. My team leader is going to respond, come help me, and get the line moving. But then the other job of the team leader, which is not often explained, is that team leader has to think about, did I just put Don back on the method, or did we find something new and we have to make the method better? So this is an example of, in dynamic work design and repetitive work, where the improvement is embedded in the work itself. And what we can do is, to go back to principle number 4, optimal challenges, we can modulate the speed of the line to create more or less problems, and we want to get just the right amount to activate that learning at the right amount, so we're learning steadily. Too much is chaos, too little we're not learning anything. So again, those 7 elements are the 7 kind of diagnostics or beginning checklist of, if I have a piece of repetitive work, how do I go look at it and make sure it's working right from a design point of view? Okay, so let's move to the second type of work. And this is the second difference of dynamic work design. The first one I said was, we look at work as it moves from person to person to person. From Julie to Amy to Susie to Bill. We don't look at the process steps. We look at and analyze the work as it moves from person to person to person. The second thing that's really unique about dynamic work design is that we recognize creative work as a different type of work, and one that we can help design and fit that work into our design. It's not an anomaly. You can't make a CEO turn everything a CEO does into a process, or a heart surgeon, or an engineer, or a finance person. There is sometimes we actually need to do studio work, which is collaborative work. And I'm going to use the example of a meeting. And again, you're going to see 7 steps we need to do this, to organize it right. You could use these 7 steps as an easy checklist to improve your meeting. We typically cut them in half and make them twice as valuable really fast, just using these 7 questions. But this is a whole type of work where we don't know the answer. We know we have to get from here to there, but we actually need the people in the room to help us get the answer. An example of a wrong design of work is a piece of studio work that we try to do in a factory mode or serial mode is an email chain. So if we get a long email chain, that's a serial mode. We're passing it from person to person to person. My countermeasure, my fix for that, is we get to about the 3rd or 4th email, I pick up the phone and call everyone on the email and say, get a room. And usually it's in my office. And how long do you think it's going to take to solve that problem when we get everyone face-to-face in the office for that long email chain? Probably 5 minutes. Because we're executing a piece of work that needs to be done collaboratively, we're trying to execute it in a serial design mode, in a serial medium. So let's go through the elements of any kind of studio work. And remember, I'm going to use a meeting, but this could be any type of collaborative effort we need. For example, when I pull the cord on the assembly line and my team leader comes over, I'm actually switching from repetitive work to collaborative work. So I'm switching into studio work, even if it's just lasting for 2 minutes. If I'm designing and I'm an innovation, I'm going to stay much more in the collaborative section of the work. That's going to be much larger, but I also have a repetitive piece that I have to do, and you're going to show you how that works. So here are the 7 steps. If you print off the slides that you get and put them faced next to each other after the session, you're going to see the seven elements are pretty close. They just show up in different ways in different kinds of work. So here they are. First, we have to define the purpose. That's like defining the value add for the client. What's the purpose and the time of the meeting? 2 is we need the right people in the room. My experience is we need 2 types of people. People that can make decisions and people that can provide information. If we just put all the engineers, don't worry, I was an engineer making fun of myself. If we just put the engineers in the room, they know too much, they know too many failure modes, and have too much information, it's going to be hard to decide what to do and make the trade-offs. If you put the managers in the room, I was a manager too, an executive too, this is hard, without the information, they're happy to make a decision, but will it be the right one? So we actually need both people in the room so the management can draw on information from the people who have the deep knowledge, or they can watch for a mistake to be made to make sure we get to the best decision. 3 is, just like building a car or something, paying an invoice, any type of repetitive work, getting a decision, solving a problem has steps. And we have to structure the conversation with pre-reads, who's going to talk first, so we know the steps to get to the decision. In our case, we'll actually build those steps visually on the wall, and basically we can go around the wall to get the information we need, make one loop, and build it correctly, build that decision or problem solution correctly. We don't know what it is, we need all the people in the room, but those sub-assemblies are made of information on the wall. The information has to be clear. I want to see if I'm ahead or behind. What was the target? They have to tell me something, and I have to be able to see if there's an issue or not. And that's the role of the leader, number 6. I'm listening to Peter talk. He's complaining about finance at MIT, and I'm going to stop him and say, Peter, am I hearing a problem? Because, again, these are invisible, so you have to develop a sense for them, a listening skill for them. And the leader's job is to listen for that, pull it out, and then we're going to get a physical manifestation on the wall and assign someone to it so we can see how many problems we've talked about. Then the leader, kind of like the decision when in physical work, serial work, repetitive work, when the team leader responds and has to decide if Don's not doing the job right, I need re-instruction, or we found something new, so too the leader has to decide here when we find an issue, can we solve the problem in this group, or do we need to escalate it to another part of management? And then we pull work in, we don't overload it, you decide the purpose of the meeting, you stick to the time, organize it well, start on time, end on time as quickly as you can, and get back to work. 7 very similar elements, but it's a different type of work. And deciding what type of work is and organizing correctly can solve a lot of problems. When you get those 2 pieces, and this is a part that my colleague picked up from the theory of work, is that most people think they're in one type of work or another. And what we've seen is that every type of work has both of these elements. And it's a matter of learning to get the elements right in the right proportion, depending on the underlying cadence and nature of the work, and then learning to switch back and forth at the proper sequence. So, for example, let's go to the physical work first, where it's pretty clear, and I think everyone knows this example. On the assembly line, we're going to have a daily huddle, and that you will see is the check, the arrow down. We're going to go check with everyone for a minute and see if everything's okay, everyone ready to start, did we learn anything from yesterday? That check is time-based, it's collaborative, and it's kind of a review. It could show up as a daily huddle, weekly staff meeting, daily meeting, annual board meeting, any type of meeting where we're going to go from one level to another and check and make sure everything's okay. It's time-based. The other arrow in the way we wire these together is a trigger. This would be event-based. I have certain boundaries and criteria, and when I cross that boundary, I have to signal for help. This is pretty clear in physical work. We stop the line. But where are those triggers in intellectual work? You have problems in your projects, in your emails, all over that are sitting, brewing, you're trying to solve yourself. Where is that escalation process to pull the cord and ask for and get immediate help? My experience in office work, administrative work, technical work, managerial work, it's not really there. The biggest trigger you have is your performance review where we're going to blame all the problems on you. There's no way really for you to signal for help in a positive way. Good example of a trigger is a fire alarm. If I walk over against the wall and pull the fire alarm, everyone understands when I should pull it, and they understand what to do when I do pull it. There's going to be horns and lights. We're going to quietly walk out. That signal goes to a specific fire department who's going to respond. So those triggers are oftentimes missing in all types of intellectual work, and that allows problems to sit and stew and get big. So if we take that idea and we build it out on a multi-level organization, you can see on this diagram, on the lower left, we're in an engineering factory. Engineers have gone to the meeting, they understand what to do, and now they're doing their design work or CAD/CAM or FEMA's or running tests in the lab, whatever they do. And then once a week or once a day, we're going to go to a team meeting. That's the middle box, and do a check-in. And then the team leader, maybe once a week or once a month, is going to go to the portfolio review and report on the status of that project in relation to all the projects that are going on in the company. Now, how we design those triggers and checks, the quality of them and the frequency of them can make work either good or miserable. So if my check is too infrequent, like happens in software before Agile, Agile's tried to solve this problem, we're going to let software engineers code for a month before we check in. And you know, they can go a long ways in the wrong direction. Anyone can in a month. So in Agile, we're checking more quickly. Do a little piece and let's check it in a reasonable amount of time. Same way on assembly line, we're going to check every 2 minutes. And on code, or once a day, we're going to get the frequency of those checks matched to the underlying cadence of the work. If I'm an engineer working on a complex problem, for my boss to come up to me every 2 minutes to say, "How you doing, Don? How you doing, Don? How you doing, Don?" You know, you want to shoot them. You know, at least get a baseball bat. There's not enough time to get enough work done to evaluate. So there's no formula or rule, except we have to try to match those checks to the underlying frequency of the work, and where's a reasonable time to check in to make sure the work I've done is in the right direction or if I need help. Same thing with the triggers. We're going to create a boundary to say if this happens, you call me, otherwise you can operate on your own. At Harley, we call these broadly freedom with fences. I'm going to give you this freedom within this fence. If you cross the fence, you need to call me. If we put the fence too far away, set the trigger too hard to pull, too many things are going to be going wrong without help. If I set it too close, it's going to be going off every day. Everything's going to be red, and we're going to be in chaos. So this is a design task, not a rule. Some people will put it as a tool and a rule, like Agile. You have to do it every 2 weeks. You have the Scrum Master who has to wear a certain hat and uniform. Instead of underlying, what are the underlying principles, and can we use these ideas to get our work moving through the organization more quickly? So let's give you a little view of what some of this looks like. Here's from a company that I worked at after I worked at Harley Davidson, and this is a visual manifestation of a frontline worker's targets and activities. You can see two charts. One's got a problem there. The red, there's a dip in the red, but this is Janet's her big targets. It's actually in the wall outside her office. She's sitting right around the corner. And on the one on the left, you can see there's a little dip. The Canadian Regulatory Authority decertified one of our parts. We had to put it all through testing. And you can see the line dipping. And the column on the right is what are the countermeasures? What are we doing to improve that? And what's the help I need? The one on the right, you can see, is all green. And so there's nothing on the right side. So now everyone knows, and Janet knows, if she's ahead or behind, if she needs help or not. And it's visible and clear to everyone. We go up a layer. We could take the intellectual work of a quality manager, give it a physical manifestation, again, to intent and activity. On the left side, you see the targets. On the right side, you see the basic activities they're using to complete those targets. So it's my quality manager. I think you can read his name, Tom Avrudik. So if Tom's having problems meeting his targets that he agreed to and told me he was going to do, and he's not meeting them, instead of calling him on the carpet and saying, Tom, what don't you understand about what I told you? The conversation is, Tom, let's go look at the board and see what's happening. Because as a friend of mine once said, if you're not meeting your goals, only one of two things is possible. Either you have the wrong activity set on the wall, or you're not executing it correctly. So now we can go and troubleshoot and actually provide help and support from management instead of just berating them. And that's probably maybe an unusual experience for people to have, is have management actually help you. But that's the idea here. This one is the high level. This is the picture of my, actually my office in 2007. On the right side, you'll see a condensed version. This one we were silent running. Things are running really smoothly. On the right side are safety, quality, delivery, cost on 3 continents. This is an organization of 5,000 people in China, Germany, Mexico, and the US. This is how we ran it. On the right side is the summary of all the operations. On the left side are all the strategic things we're doing. There's a row of charts there that describe the problems we're having in the supply base, There's some engineering make-buy decisions, those type of things that we're talking about 2 to 3 years out. But that's how simple, when you get a physical manifestation of the work and things got running smoothly, that's how we can do it. There's some charts you can see on my desk. I have an inventory chart, which I watch every day. There's a product development, some things are working. But we stood in front of that board once a week, and that's how we ran the business. If there was a target, it was up there. If we're doing something, it's up there. If it's not on the board, we're not doing it. Just an idea of what this looks like when you move to knowledge work. Okay, so we have a few minutes left, and I want to go through a small case, which is, this is the story of a refinery, and the people who are running procurement called me and asked me if I would come help them. And the story is the procurement office is about 3 miles away from the actual refinery for safety reasons. And the manager says, Don, I have 6 or 8, I forget exactly how many it was, permanent employees who are working like 10, 12 hours a day. And I have 4 or 5 contract employees that are working 8 hours a day. And we're falling farther behind. Can you come and help us? Sure. So when I arrive, of course, they give the information they give me. This is an actual picture, but I taped it together. They gave me the process map of how to take a request from the refinery and turn it into a purchase order and deliver it. Okay, there's I think I count them 149 boxes, and they said, Don, here's the process. I'm sure you want to use this when you as you're solving the problem. And actually, I don't. And remember, I said there were 2 differences. One, we're going to track the work from person to person, not the process steps. And 2, we're going to recognize studio work and factory work. Recognize studio work as real work, and we're going to organize the studio and factory work in the right way. And we're going to use those 2 tricks to run this case. So this is a picture of how they thought about the work. And can you guess how often the procurement people looked at this process map? My guess is once, a long time ago. And there were people in here doing this job for 30 years. It's not something that was up on the wall that they referred to. And in fact, if you actually do the steps in this process, I'm sure it actually works. Those process steps were not the problem. Let me show you after 2 days the map I had from a dynamic work design view of how we could see the situation and quickly make some progress. First, as I said, we track the work from person to person. So this little diagram, you're going to see them as they go across. The little person there is the ops person in the refinery. That little box represents whatever work that ops person is doing. I don't know what it is. I only care how we wire it together. So I just represent it with a box with a little work. And it's like it says P and P. So we don't like standard work because it has, I don't think it's a good Western translation of what really was happening at Toyota when people said, oh, standard work is a big deal. We call it precise and participatory. One, it's the best way we know now, and as soon as we find a different way, we're going to change it so it's a dynamic view of standard work. And the second thing, there are 2 parties in this. The person doing the work learns a lot about the work from doing it, and we want them partnered with the designer or the management to together discover better ways. Not just the manager saying, this is what I want you to do, be quiet and do what I told you, or just the frontline person just saying, oh, this sounds good, I'll try this. We want a partnership to connect that. So precise, the best way we know, and participatory, once we figure out what to do, we're going to change it in a structured way as fast as we can. That's what that box represents, the work they're doing. Then you're going to see an input and an output. So here we go to the next person. The output of the ops person is actually a request. They put it through in a system, but it's a request for either products or services. And it goes to the procurement person. The output of the ops person is the input of the procurement person. The same box we have for procurement. There's a little box. I don't care what you do. That's probably where those 149 steps were. But the procurement person has an output. So we're going to trace the output. Where does it go? What's he do? He produces a purchase order, which goes to accounts payable in a different country electronically, and it goes to the supplier. Each one of those, again, represented by they have an input and output, who they are. And then what happens, the middle step, this is kind of the, you have to be creative with this type of thing. A little river of time and space it goes, And basically, we just traced this work over all the way through the system of how it's supposed to work. And then at every place, we found out what the issues were with getting the work through the system, and those red arrows represent all the things that were going wrong that were causing all the overtime. We can't pay the supplier, so he's called us to not working. The people in the refinery haven't gotten their parts and services. Where is it? And the life of these procurement people was trying to get process a purchase order, which actually, if all the information was right, take 3 to 5 minutes. And there's only 25 a day for them. But they're spending 12 hours and have extra people. So they're doing that work. And the other thing they're doing is all those red arrows are problems that caused. They're weeks old, now complicated. They've got to stop and go research. And they're doing this all mixed up together. So we did 2 interventions, again, with dynamic work design. The first thing we did is make sure that first exchange is clean. Make sure that the operations person gives the procurement person all the information they need to do the work. The system wasn't perfect, and there was an email piece. It doesn't matter. What they did was they made a little checklist, and they used email and the system, so they didn't have to do any IT changes to make sure the people in the refinery knew what information the procurement people needed. When they had it, they got done in 5 minutes. That's the first thing we did. That probably knocked out half of the problems going into the system right away. The other thing we did was we took up their mixed up day and we said this: if we come in the morning and we have your purchase request at 7 o'clock, it's getting done by 12, unless there's a problem. So we want all the procurement people to do all this repetitive work, high turn, repetitive, very process-oriented work in the morning. Get it done. In the afternoon, we're going to switch to studio. We're going to get the accounts payable person, instead of calling me on the phone, sending me emails all day, come over and see us, and we're going to get all the procurement people in the room, and together we're going to go into studio mode and try to solve all the problems that came up today, and then work off the big pile, the hangover they had of stuff in queue. Now, when they did that, caught the problem in the room, someone likely knows, oh, I know that vendor, I know the address, the tax code was off. They could solve the problem right there, and others went quickly. The end of the story is, within 3 months, they got rid of all the contract people, and they were down from 12 hours to maybe 8 or 9. 2 years later, they're down to 2 people. We didn't change the process. We didn't do IT. We didn't do a reorganization. We didn't change the style of organization. We just did the work design. Okay. That's as much as I can do in 40 minutes, or 37 and a half. I'm going to turn it back over to Peter and for your questions.
Great, thank you very much, Don. While you've been talking, we've been having a lot of questions coming in, and I'm sure there'll be more, so please keep them coming. I'll keep checking back and see if I can add any more in. In the meantime, just to get us going, a lot of people were asking questions earlier on about how dynamic work design relates to or compares to a lot of the other sort of methods and techniques that you alluded to at the beginning. That there are a number out there. Is that something that you could elaborate a bit more on?
Yeah, there are 3 basic types. One whole category is are tools that are either Six Sigma or Six Sigma related. These came out of the Six Sigma movement based on Motorola and then General Electric, and are based on Deming's science of statistical controls. These are very robust, statistically based tools that can handle multivariate analysis. But what they are is a point solution. I can go in and fix one problem, and it's bringing in the artillery when maybe you only needed scissors. Mm-hmm. So it's a nice tool, but for us, it's a very complex, powerful tool, but it's not the philosophy, and it's not the hammer to beat everything down. There are a lot of other tools. Another category is Toyota Production System, or its variant called Lean, which the Americans have called, guys from MIT named it Lean, Steve Womack and those guys. Was it Womack or? Yeah, and they pulled out pieces of it, but Toyota Production System is much more organic. It's much like dynamic work design, but it's based in physical work. They made tremendous progress with that over 50 years. The problem with it is, when people go study it, they see it as a set of tools, not the underlying ideas, and they try to transfer the tools to places where the tools didn't originate from. Those tools are a product of solving problems at Toyota. Sometimes they transfer, sometimes they don't. Then the third category is Agile Scrum, which is kind of a blend between the two, and it's one instance where these kind of undeniable principles around dynamic work design have been approved in a certain industry like software, made great gains, but then the mistake is the same. People try to take the rule from software and the idea, the underlying idea, and apply the rule to a different area instead of the underlying science. But they're all good improvement tools. I think from our point of view, we've tried to get to the underlying principles that drive them all and try to help people, especially move into knowledge work, strategy, implementation, administration, engineering, technical stuff, and use the ideas and approaches to come up with unique solutions for that work.
Great, that's very helpful. Thank you. So you've seen many companies and different kinds of organizations trying to implement that whole range of different techniques, and some have succeeded, but many don't get the kind of benefits that they've seen the real high achievers obtaining. What's your hypothesis or evidence around that issue? Why are some succeeding but many are not in actually applying these techniques?
That's a good question. I think there are two drivers for sustainability and success. There are a long list of failure modes. I'll talk to one or two, but I think the thing for us that we've seen drive success is when the leaders, and sometimes even just takes one, but the leadership group at the top takes this on as the way they want to do work and not something they're going to hire a consultant to do to someone else. If they realize they have to actually think about work in a different way themselves to change the company, and they're engaged in it. And the second piece is they have to do it based on science, not like, oh, I'm going to manage by walking around or some kind of thing they made up. And this has been the advantage for me. I used to be one of those guys of having my colleague, Nelson Petting, who's now also an associate dean and a social scientist, and I would try something, and he'd say, Don, that's junk science. What's really going on here? And this, I fix stuff, Nelson studies it, I end up getting faster, he ends up getting smarter. That's been the secret to this now almost 22-year collaboration, to getting to the bottom of this. So I think two things. One is that the leaders have to actually want to change themselves and the organization, and two, they need some underlying science, not myth-based stuff, to go after it.
That's great. And you mentioned a few times in that explanation the word change, and a lot of people have been asking variations of the question of this looks great, but so what in my organization, whether it's because it's small, not large, the industry that we're in, the kind of culture, if you like, that we have in our company, then that's not necessarily such a straightforward thing. How do we set about changing the culture and the way of being in an organization to enable us to implement these kinds of ideas?
So first of all, every type of work and every type of company is unique. This is the mistake many people made. They try to just copy and paste, and it doesn't work. But underlying that uniqueness are design principles that we can see what at the base of the failure mode. So I can go into any company, any type of work, and see that the intent and activity are not matched up. The target's not clear and the activity set is not clear and they don't match. Now that can show up in a million different ways. So that's one, is that at the base of those, we can tie these to certain design ideas which help me see the failure mode and the way to approach, even though the approach and the solution are going to be very unique for that industry. Second thing I can say is the culture is created by behavior. And usually people are following the leadership's behavior, not what they say, because the leaders have been successful. Either the original builders of the business or the current management, they've gotten to the top. So if I want to get to the top, I'm going to watch what my leadership is doing, and those repeated behaviors become the culture. The problem with changing the culture is the people who are best at the culture are the leadership. So if you want a different culture, the leadership has got to give it room to grow. Even if they can't change it, they at least have got to know, I can't do it, but I'm going to nurture it and let it go. And the way we do it is by small experiments, find a better way to do the work, give those behaviors a lot of airtime and a lot of publicity, and let them create the culture because they're new behaviors. Talking about the culture and the way people act is blaming people for a bad design. What we have to do is actually change the way the work happens and the way the management system runs in a new behavior, and that becomes the culture. Culture is the result of good work, not the cause of bad work, good or bad work. It's the result, not the cause. So we don't attack it directly. We attack it by the work. For example, we put post-it notes up on the wall for executives to work on a problem, and immediately they get collaborative. I don't care how much they hate each other, how much they've been fighting, immediately they start solving the problem on the board with no training from HR. So it's the work activity that creates the culture.
So in other words, asking the question, how do we change the culture, is actually asking the wrong question.
Exactly.
That's the observable result of having
Right.
changed how work happens in the
Exactly
organization.
Right.
That's actually a fascinating turnaround of how we often think about the impact that we can have as a manager or as a leader in an organization. We're getting quite a lot of questions. You talked about examples where some managers in this mode of working, dynamic work design, come in and help analyze and solve problems, whether that's help with the process of that or accessing resources or creating goals around that. But what have you seen being the behaviors of the managers in terms of how they manage? It sounds like there's a shift from, if you like, command and control to coaching happening in the workplace as you implement this. Is that correct? And if it is, what kind of advice have you seen work for people that are in that position of being that manager? How do they think about how they should act differently?
Well, let's just create the playing field first. On one end is micromanaging, which is you're just going to do what I tell you. Right? I'm going to make all the decisions. I'm going to watch you. You're going to do it. And if you do it wrong, I'm going to slap you around or correct you. Just do what I say. That does not create the collaboration between the management system, the designers, and the people doing the work. On the other extreme, we can say, oh, geez, that's a bad behavior. Power control is bad, so we're just going to let you do whatever you want because I'm sure you understand how to do this work better than me. And that's, a lot of people call it empowerment. I call it abandonment. Because even if I know the activity set and I know the work, I'm not really sure if I make a change what it's worth or if it's the most important thing to work on. So there is a structured way in between where the management still has power and control. They still define the needs of the business, but they engage the people in asking them, how can we solve this problem, and bringing their knowledge and resources to bear. So when I go talk to someone, they pull the cord or signal me to come, I first want to ask, how can I help you? I want to hear what they say, because if I don't understand their thinking, there's no way that I can help them learn and get better if I just keep giving them the answers. So I'm going to first see what they are and then provide help, guidance, or support, or no, or different direction. But think about this. The most important goal of leaders is to produce the next generation of leaders. And if my method is not helping people get smarter because I don't understand their thinking or I don't know how to help them, then I failed that mission. So that's why coaching, this structured, it's a design, it's not a choice. I need to talk to you once a week or once a day or when this happens, and here's the way I'm going to come. Now we're both getting smarter, but I'm actually helping you move your experience and skill faster and faster, and that means I'm leaving the business or the organization in good hands.
Great, that's helpful. Maybe many people find themselves in a situation that their organization isn't there yet on this. We've all got a boss. Even if you own the company, you've still got a boss somewhere, right? So if you turn the telescope around, what have you seen that's been effective or work for people who are trying to encourage their leadership, their management to exhibit these kinds of behaviors?
I will tell you that because I started on the factory floor myself, I used to run a metal lathe for piecework as a high school graduate and ended up as an executive at Harley and other places. And for many years, as I got smart about this and get enthusiastic about it, I tried to convince my boss to do it or train them. And they're not having any of it. The most effective way I found to get the attention of the management is to make a prediction about what you're going to do. Hey, Peter, you know that quality problem we've had with cams? I'm going to go work on it, and I think in 90 days I'm going to cut that number in half. Peter's going to go, okay, great, Don, now get back to work or go do whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But in 90 days, I'm going to come back and say, Peter, do you remember when I said I would make that 50% improvement in quality in camps? You go, yeah. All right, here's the data. If I do that 2 or 3 times, Peter's going to start asking me, what the hell's going on? Because think about it, if you're a manager and someone predicts they're going to deliver you something and then they do it, that you know that person is important to you because you want to get ahead. Now maybe they won't want to know what you're doing, but they're certainly going to give you room to go, and it's the way to get attention of the organization by demonstrating this stuff. But if you just do it and don't talk about it, they won't get it. So you have to predict it, then go do it, and then talk about it, and that's the way, by producing the results, someone's going to get interested in how you're doing it or how we can do it other places. That's the most effective way I've had of trying to get other people interested. And it doesn't say you have to change the way you work or whatever. I'm just going to demonstrate it, and usually that begins to get headway.
That's great advice, and we've got so many more questions coming in, but I'm afraid we're running out of time for this part of the webinar. But maybe people would like to join us in the next segment on Facebook to keep asking questions. In the meantime, really like to thank you, Don, for spending this time with us and explaining your work and these principles. And you do, as I mentioned at the beginning, teach these concepts in a number of programs around MIT Sloan, including 2 in executive education, which we're showing on the screen right now. And I think that if people are interested in following up, we're going to distribute the slides, and there's a lot more information on our website and on your website about these approaches and the companies that you've worked with. There's a lot of other things that you can read. You have an article in MIT Sloan Management Review that came out recently, which
I have 2, one in the spring, one in the winter, and we have another one coming up soon.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that productivity alone is a sign of
subscribe to the Sloan Management Review, and you can keep up with us.
That's great. So again, we've had many questions. We've just scratched the surface, I think, of your work and how people can find this dynamic work design principles helpful in every kind of work in every industry. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for this past hour, for this webinar. Thank you, Don.
And thank you to the audience. I know there's a lot of people I know that have spread the word and gotten their colleagues in. So hello to all of you, and thank you very much.
And if anyone can stay with us and move over to the live Facebook session that we will push out shortly, then we'd love to keep the conversation going. Meanwhile, thank you very much, and we'll look forward to seeing you all again soon.
Thanks, Peter.